Good morning, everyone. We thought we would take inspiration from the Chinese Congress and have this large meeting room this week. I hope Sandra doesn't escort me out during the proceedings. But we're glad to have you here. We have this tradition at the MedTech conference because the official panel sessions never allow enough time for either the presenters to go into the detail that they would like, or for the audience to ask the questions that they have. So we're delighted that this year we're able to have this overtime session for the session we had yesterday afternoon on inter-American regulatory convergence. And we have the moderator, panel participants, and representatives of the organizations, most of them that had presentations yesterday. So I think maybe just before we begin, I'd like to do a round of introductions just for the benefit of the group. We'll start with those in the room, and then we'll go to those online. And then I'll pass it over to Sandra. So please. And to speaking, just push the button with the person speaking.
Good morning, everyone. This is Tamara Olmos. I am coming from Mexico, AMIT, representing the Ethics Committee.
Hello, good morning, everybody. I am Ana Riquelme from AMIT, Mexico. I am the Executive Director of the association. It's a pleasure.
Hola, buenos días. Disculpen que yo hable en español. Mi inglés no es muy bueno que digamos.
Good morning, everyone. I apologize, I speak Spanish. My name is Jorge Aniel. I'm the Director of Medical Devices for the Pharmaceutical Industry Chamber in Mexico.
Good morning. My name is Sergio Rocha. I am a president of Abride Brazil, distributors and manufacturer and importers products.
Hello, good morning. My name is Carlos Gouveia, president of CBDL, the In Vitro Diagnostic Association, ABIS, the Innovative Healthcare Industry Alliance, and representative also of Ethics Health Institute.
Hi, good morning, José Márcio from ABIS, Brazil.
Good morning, John Beloy from Abbott Labs.
Good morning. My name is Susan Suarez. I'm part of the team, MDRC team project, and I'm liaison for Colombia.
Good morning, everyone. Christian Rawada. I'm the manager of the USAID COVID-19 Medical Device Regulatory Convergence Project.
Good morning, Tammy Storwald. I'm with Roche Diagnostics, and I'm head of global regulatory policy for supranational organizations and foundational principles.
Good morning. I'm Daniel Vasquez with the U.S. Agency for International Development. I'm the senior standard specialist and also the person that oversees on USAID behalf the work that we jointly do with AdvaMed under the MDRC project. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Melissa Torres. I'm the Associate Director for International Affairs at FDA Center for Devices, and we also help support the MDRC project.
Good morning. I'm Davina Morano. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor at US FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health.
Good morning. I'm Augusto Gayer from Anvisa, the Brazilian Health Regulatory Agency, the Medical Devices Office.
Good morning. My name is Dario Belluomini. I'm with MedTech Europe's International Affairs team.
Good morning, Douglas Rodriguez, Regulatory Policy Head for Latin American at Roche Diagnostics.
Good morning. My name is Marisol Sanchez, Executive Director of Medical Device Chamber, Colombia.
Veronica. So seriously, Veronica McBride, Global Department at AdvaMed, Manager International Conferences Meetings, provide administrative support for the global team, and I work in the programming department for conference and events.
And maybe with that, Sandra, I'll pass it over to you to ask our folks online to introduce themselves and take it from there. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So if we would continue with Mabel Barbosa from INVIMA. If you can introduce yourself, Mabel, please.
Hola, buenos días para todos. Mabel Barbosa, asesora
Hi,
técnica de la Dirección
Mabel Barbosa, Technical Advisor for medical devices and other technologies from INVIMA, Colombia.
Just a quick comment before we move forward. You should have received links as speakers, or you should have registered as participants so you can gain access to the interpretation just by using getting into the Zoom link, and then just if you can have your computers muted and just wearing your headphones, and then you can have access to the interpretation, both English and Portuguese as you prefer. If you have an issue with the links, just let us know and we'll forward those to you again. Thank you.
And if anyone needs headphones, we have extra.
Oh, yes, we do. Nice colors available. Okay, thank you, Mabel. Oscar?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Oscar Marin, and I'm the coordinator of the medical devices from the Department of Regulations in Colombia.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And then we're going to get started with the last video that we didn't have a chance yesterday to display, that was prepared by Coffee Breeze, that unfortunately cannot join us here physically or virtually today. But I think it is important for us to learn about the message that they wanted to share with us. So Veronica, if you can help us with that. It is also, it is originally recorded in English by Coffee Breeze. And it is presented by the new director for international affairs at Coffee Breeze, Amina Achibo. So, thank you, Veronica.
Equivalence recognitions in order to face the limitations highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic. We've all been in the storm, and we're still in the same ocean, but we're not all in the same boat. Each country, each population, each government, each economy have their own differences, circumstances, and characteristics that sometimes make it hard to define a single path or discern what would be the right thing to do. Environment. In our case, here in Mexico, we have a population of about 130 million inhabitants. And firstly, I would like to take this opportunity to present the work that has been done here in Coffee Breeze as a response for the pandemic and the mechanisms that we have adopted in Mexico to move forward through the emergency and beyond. So the national regulatory authorities had to learn the hard way. As the popular saying goes, no pain, no gain. The importance of resorting to cooperation mechanisms and to a greater or lesser extent to the equivalence recognitions in order to face the limitations highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic. We've all been in the storm, and we're still in the same ocean, but we're not all in the same boat. Each country, each population, each government, each economy have their own differences, circumstances, and characteristics that sometimes make it hard to define a single path or discern what would be the right thing to do. Environment. In our case, here in Mexico, we have a population of about 130 million inhabitants, and we have less than 2,000 people to protect the population from sanitary risk here at Coffee Breeze. So it was a difficult landscape that required reorganization of functions, rearrangement of equipment and work materials. We also suffer from the reductions of personnel and sometimes compromised mental health. And we had to adapt to a different work and environment. We had an emergency policy, but it was not robust enough. without clear guidelines and lacking a precise risk assessment. The experience emphasized the awareness of our limitations and forced us to take actions that in the past were seen as long-term goals. It is not new that the available resources were already quite limited, but the pandemic severely aggravated them, forcing the issuance of emergency measures to address the disease, face the shortage of medical products, and bring as soon as possible the new technologies and treatment that the COVID-19 pandemic required. This unprecedented speed of the technological developments required regulation to ensure, as far as possible, the quality and safety at the same rate. In this regard, we identified that reliance deserves a more exhaustive application than ever before. Fortunately, there were already good indications and a basis at the global level with origins in 2016, which had been formalized since 2018. So COFEPRIS preferably has had some streamlined measures in place. For example, we had the equivalence agreements issues that were issued in 2010 and 2012 regarding requirements and technical evaluations carried out by the FDA, Health Canada, and Japan for the authorization of products previously marketed in their countries, which greatly reduced management times. Likewise, we had the agreements that were issued in 2011 and 2014 that allowed abbreviated requirements for low sanitary risk products, so we could avoid overregulation. This was applied also for products that, due to their specific characteristic and use, were not classified as medical devices and therefore did not require our authorization. Through these provisions, it was possible to facilitate and accept the existence of alternative manufacturers, which contributed to protect the population from the virus or provided better conditions for the care of the people. Already in the midst of the pandemic, in order to fast release the authorization, we had to be flexible with certain criteria. We granted greater confidence in our counterpart to solve the public supply and jointly advance in common objective, considering mainly international standards and references. So because of the pandemic, we designed emergency plans. As an example, in January 2020, a strategy was established to strengthen the role of COFEPRIS. We advertised campaign and grow our presence in the media. We had daily communication with the public at all levels of governments, and we increased the communication and interinstitutional cooperation. We had an outstanding collaboration with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to facilitate the identification of manufacturers around the world. Ministerial resolutions were issued that legally allowed us to prioritize procedures related to COVID-19 pandemic, such as diagnostics tests, mask, respirator, among others, as well as accelerated attention of their corresponding processes based on international technical and scientific evidence. This way, the supply was covered, even if it was conditioned and subject to fulfilling requirements and to complete processes. The communication and interaction between national regulatory authorities regionally and globally was enhanced. Opportunities for synergy between authorities and regulatory systems were also frequently sought, and information was exchanged every day. Also, the research and development processes and the installation of new manufacturing or conditioning facilities were followed by COFEPRIS in real time, so there would be fewer preventative measures. Relevant information on inspections was also shared among the authorities, and we designed models of virtual inspections and documental recertification. At the same time, we kept the harmonization efforts alive in order to advance in the consolidation of reliance, no longer thinking of it as an emergency mitigation, but foreseeing the need to establish permanent measures and transform successful practices into formal procedures, looking to implement them permanently in the regular operation of COFEPRIS. COVID has been a warning and a learning for regulatory convergence and the reconfiguration of our health systems. It has awakened the political will, coinciding with the health priorities and needs, with or without an emergency. It is essential to recognize capacity and resource limitations, and mainly time constraints, to make health supplies available to the population, preserving guarantees of quality, safety, and efficacy. So far, I believe that the origin of inspiration no longer matters. We are sure that the international cooperation, and in particular reliance, is not an eventual measure to deal with the emergency. Today, the realistic perception of our limitations and the recognition of our capabilities is fundamental for the optimization of available resources. As our final goal is to work under the best regulatory international practices and move forward on a steady improvement pathway that allow us to maintain and update national regulatory framework, it is important to be part of the forums that lead the global trend. So in order to facilitate international trade on health supplies, we are actively working on regulatory convergence within the framework of trade agreements, such as the United States, Mexico, and Canada agreements and the Pacific Alliance, which is integrated by Chile, Colombia, Peru, and Mexico, where there is a specific annex for medical devices to reduce the technical barriers to trade. The first one is focused mainly in good regulatory practices, convergence, and MDSAP recognition. And the second one establishes the basis for standardization of minimal technical requirements of authorizations. In the bilateral framework, due to our geographical positions, our main commercial partners in the sector are the United States. Therefore, we maintain a broad and close relationships with the FDA, and now also we benefit from the important support from the Standard Alliance that is helping us to achieve compliance with the commitments of the North American Trade Agreement. And also this organization with whom we proudly work and the project in which we are affirming this participation today. Regarding the MDRC between COFEPRIS and the Standard Alliance, we are in the second year of implementation. The first year was quite productive, despite having started after the middle of the year. Following the signing of the letter of intent between the two parties at the end of August 2021, which defined the general lines of action for the project, several training sessions and workshops were held in preparation for the recognitions of certificate issues based on the MDSAP. A webinar also was held on good regulatory practices with the collaboration of the Ministry of Economy and the Mexican Pharmacopoeia. Also, we held a series of virtual seminars on the use of international standards and references and conformity assessment to promote both their use and their active participation of all the relevant stakeholders in the implementation of regulations. To close this cycle, we prepare and deliver an annual report with detailed information on the progress achieved up to that date. At the beginning of this year, we also designed the action plan for 2022, whose purposes included the collection of inputs and capacity building to support the technical development that we believe will eventually allow COFEPRIS to join the IMDRF and the MDSAP. So within the execution plans of the MDRC, which is already underway, we are currently working on a proposed tool that is in a checklist format that seeks to facilitate the implementation of good regulatory practices in the process of developing or updating technical standards in accordance with international commitments. In addition, at the end of August, we held a hybrid workshop on software as medical device, and we would like to organize one more on stabilities, for which the corresponding agenda is now being formulated. It is also worth mentioning that we maintain continuous communication and periodic meetings with the Inter-American Coalitions for Regulatory Convergence. Finally, looking further into the future, in this work session, we have jointly identified several areas of opportunities which are already being incorporated into the following work plans for the next 2 years. As I already mentioned, some actions that we are currently implementing were originally emergency measures to address the pandemic. In January 2020, Mexico published an unilateral equivalence mechanism to allow the importation and fast authorization of vaccines and health products to face the pandemic based on information and decisions from stringent regulatory authorities and other international references. This instrument was upgraded in June 2021, expanding its scope to satisfy the supply needs of the public health sector, including this time medical devices. But there has also been continuity in harmonization initiative that started prior to the pandemic. At the end of last year, COFEPRIS issued a modification to its GMP regulation. The main advance in this instrument was to adopt the ISO provisions on quality management systems. And we have already identified some improvement opportunities that are set into consideration for following amendments. We also are making now important changes in terms of digitalizations. So we are designing more electronic procedures that are being incorporated into our website for greater convenience and prompt resolutions for users. Some of these procedures provide almost an automatic resolutions, for example, for notification and administrative modifications. Also from the conditions imposed by the COVID, we carried out visual inspections that we are now working on and to formalize, and also to expand to medical devices under a risk-based approach. So what are the next steps for COFEPRIS? Formal criteria and recognition schemes will be reformulated, standardizing and clarifying their operations. These include the MDSAP and other reliance applications. We have also created an internal working group to review other national standards that we need to update, such as the one on labeling and the other one on technosurveillance, both in harmonization with international standards such as ISO and IMDRF. While we move to a more adequate regulation, we are reopening spaces to receive the regulated sector and provide guidance to technical session with the regulated sector. Among other regulatory needs, we created a working group on software as medical device with the participation of other stakeholders such as the industry, academy, and pharmacopoeia, where we are looking to gather more information and work together to strengthen the regulation. The logic and obvious step to reach our goal is to obtain the affiliation to the MDSAP. We are actually today completing the application form, but in the meantime, we are completing training and having bilateral support to address doubts about the implementation. It is also to continue working with the MDRC and other convergence projects. Okay. And this year, we formalized our wishes to belong to the IMDRF. So last September, we participated as invited observers in open events and sessions. This was our first time attending these kind of meetings. We have also requested to have access to the good regulatory review practices and personal medical devices groups. There is also some progress that is made within the Mexican Pharmacopoeia. Soon, the 5th edition of the medical devices supplement will be published. We believe that this is the more important advanced technical document that shows the path for the legislation in Mexico. And upcoming improvement includes, for example, better criteria for classifications based on risk level according to the IMDRF suggestions, amendments in guidelines for market authorizations, and modifications and extensions. grouping or sorting criteria, stability studies, and software as a medical device. So as you can see, we have some upcoming improvements there to the harmonization that are coming. Thank you very much for your time.
So well, that was like a quick summary on everything that COFEPRIS is intending to do. Unfortunately, they could not join us virtually today to respond some questions that we know that are many, but we will try to find additional opportunities for a direct interaction with them as we have started to have. So probably the way we can get started our conversation today is by opening up the opportunity to ask questions both to Oscar and Mabel on what we listen about what's going on in Colombia in regards of regulatory convergence initiatives. So I would like to start opening the floor with them, and then we will then continue with a wider discussion on this topic. So any question for Mabel, that is now representing Dr. Ayala, that could not join us today, but will be with us later today and tomorrow. So this morning she's not here, but we have Mabel with us. So any question for Oscar and Mabel? No questions? Okay, well, then probably I will have one, and I think, I mean, Oscar, we listened to the interpretation of your presentation yesterday in English. Probably what I'd like to ask is, how do you see your role as Ministry of Health being the responsible to develop regulations directly involved in what you shared with us yesterday on centralized purchases? And I am asking this because in many, I mean, in many geographies, it is kind of like a clearly stated separation between the entity that develops regulations and the entities that are responsible for the purchasing. I think your microphone is closed.
Well, the same happens here. There is a clear and well-defined separation for that. But a part of what I wanted to say yesterday was that this situation of centralized procurement has been affected by this legal framework. There is a general bill for contracts. It is known as the Law of 80. And this is a very rigid structure, which requires several preconditions that have been well standardized for procurement. This one has worked well in the emergency. And that's what I wanted to mention to you, because at that moment, conditions of scarcity and the need to fulfill contracts made the process more complicated. At that moment, this was controlled by the ministry, and there was a series of temporary instructions to review procurement processes. And in the way they were developed, there were some delays. There was successful acquisition of some products, but the ministry had to take one of two positions. One was to define or to make this attention to COVID, doing centralized procurement or with different regulatory procedures for the availability of medical devices in the market to be better. And it works better in the regulations better than centralized procurement. But and the topics of sanitary emergency.
Okay, thank you very much, Oscar. So if there, oh, I'm sorry, John.
Hi, more of a kind of a general question, I guess, than anything. We sit here, we see a lot of good initiatives that are going on. A lot of the countries are trying to get to where they need to be. We just heard, we look at NAM 241 for Mexico coming into alignment with MDSAP and 1345. We've got software as a medical device that's being brought up there, but we continue to run into the resource issue for getting things through. So yesterday we sit here and we listen to the changes due to the rate of innovation. And so this gap keeps getting bigger and bigger between where we are in Latin America and where we are in the rest of the world. Convergence is great, but unless we get to the point where we start doing reliance and getting some of these products on the market more quickly, I mean, how do we move Latin America to a space where we really do not just recognize that reliance is there, but we actually use it and implement it? Because otherwise, this is just going to keep getting worse and worse. Good intentions are great, but we need to be able to get products on the market, and everybody's got resource issues. So just kind of raising it as a general question or concern about how do we move there?
I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. I think, it's one thing that we are trying to think about as we are doing some of this capacity building. We know that a lot of these countries, some of them that don't even have regulatory systems, the first thing they want to do is, we want to do everything. We want to do pre-market review and post-market, so much like I did yesterday, we try to give them the reality of it. Look at the size of our organization. Look at the challenges that we have. And so we've thought a lot more too, even when we talk about the training, is focusing on how they may be able to utilize our assessments. But even things like, how do you go onto our system? How do you verify that something's been approved or cleared? And so we're trying to think about how we can even tailor some of the training towards that direction as well, not just this is what pre-market requirements are, this is what post-market requirements are, but then also taking it in a next step of this is how you may be able to verify that something's been approved in our country. We do, throughout the themes of our different webinars and training series, we have been talking quite a bit about reliance, not recreating the system, utilization of international standards and best practices, utilization of MDSAP. We've had several sessions on MDSAP and what it is and what it isn't and how they can utilize those reports. So we have been trying to really tailor a lot of the training towards that direction. There's not a lot we can do necessarily besides, trying to spread the word and the messages out there. But I will say that's something we have been doing and are continuing to do so through the MDRC project.
I would add to that too, that we heard in the sessions yesterday. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Stephen. I don't have a lot of experience working with regulatory frameworks for medical devices, but I do have some working with regulatory frameworks in general. Borrowing from that experience, building capacities in agencies in partner countries, as the agency does throughout the world, it's never easy and it's always time consuming. Looking at some of the lessons that we have learned throughout the years, and especially myself, these engagements, to be productive and to be to the point where you can see significant and substantive changes, might take 3-4 years at least of engagement and working directly with agencies and training people. So they finally get to internalize what you want and see the value on the things that you're teaching. So then they take them as theirs. There's always going to be a challenge with personnel rotation, with budgets and so on. And there might be times where you have been working with an agency for an extended period of time, and suddenly a change of administration comes, and with just a signature, half of a department disappears, and they bring new people, and you have to start again. So I think that the best way that you can achieve the results for capacity building is just to continue to be engaged, and also to create permanent reference that people can look at and they can use and they can easily understand as they get into a new job. Because when you have a new official coming in, they still need to get a job. But if they don't have an easy reference, an easy guide that they can just look at and understand what they need to do, they're just going to borrow from the wrong places. And even if you don't get to 100 in that first year with the elements that you already have created, at least you have some steps or help them in the first initial steps that might be very crucial.
I should have probably elaborated a bit on this as well. Not only do we try to do these efforts through the MDRC project, but we do have our office in the Latin America region. We do have a medical device specialist. One of the main goals for them is to really do capacity building. And so they have had a lot of meetings with several countries in the region. We continue to say, use international best practices, do reliance, utilization of MDSAP. Whenever you see any trade agreements, and right now we are not doing any necessarily trade agreements negotiations, but we always push those principles through anything that we can as IMDRF, MDSAP, reliance. So from an agency perspective, we do try to push it as many ways as we can. Even when we see proposed legislations, we also comment on those, review them through our Office of Global Policy and Strategy. Joseph sitting over there. They help coordinate a lot of this as well. So there's multiple angles we do try to hit them on, but I agree. I mean, we've had our own set of frustrations, I think, looking at, even where we have agreements in place, where there should be utilization of MDSAP, it's taken years because of some of the key things you've said. There's constant change over in some of these agencies. As soon as there's an election, there's new individuals coming. And so whatever strides we've made with those particular groups within each of the agencies, in a year, it's gone, we start over again. So we feel like it's almost like Groundhog Day in a sense. We're constantly having to do the same messages, constantly having to build those relationships. And then once we get to that comfortable zone, we have new individuals in again, unfortunately.
And maybe just to complement that, we heard yesterday in the presentations how COVID provided an opportunity for the first time really for reliance, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from CDRH and from Anvisa really leveraging it in a way that hadn't been in the past. And so that's an opening. But I think when we use the term convergence, we generally mean it's not just the convergence of the technical regulations and standards, but it's meant to capture everything we're doing on reliance and recognition and foundational good regulatory practices. So it's a matrix of efforts and not either or. This afternoon in the MDRC dedicated session, we'll really focus on what's been done so far and what we hope to achieve by the end of the project, but maybe emphasizing some of the comments that Sandra was making yesterday. We emphasize the co-responsibilities that we have with the private sector and the public sector. And it's often, we're trying very hard through the coalition to put at least as much, if not more, focus on what the private sector is doing. So collectively, we've got a responsibility to be, as governments to be conducting public consultations, and then private sector to be responding to them, but then also notifying draft technical regulations to the TBT, and then tying those comments ideally to the comments submitted in the context of a domestic public consultation, and having the trade associations and the companies and the regulatory authorities participating on the standards committees in all the countries and all the markets to ensure that the relevant international standards from ISO, IEC, et cetera, are being adopted as needed. Some countries don't need to have an adoption. And that facilitates the path for the regulatory authorities to use them. And we're trying to, and we also have a separate work stream with UNE, of course, are all of our colleagues in Europe, and making sure that there's no barriers to the Spanish language standards and Portuguese language standards being available to the national standards bodies across Latin America. So as we continue our work streams with the governments for them to get more engaged in standards, we really want to double down on what we're doing with the companies. And we really appreciate the efforts that the companies have made at building out standards capacities as part of the broader regulatory work. And we really thank you, John, for leaning into that. And I think also it's helpful, I don't know that this exists, but it would be very helpful if we had kind of a Hippocratic oath for regulatory work to do no harm. Because one of the major obstacles we find in regulatory non-alignments and COVID-19 bottlenecks is a violation of the WHO stepwise approach, where the regulatory authorities taking on more than they can accomplish, which is exacerbated when they have country unique requirements. These are kind of just highlighting and mapping out the different streams on which we're working, and we couldn't agree with you more. But I think you'll see that'll be a constant thread of the conversation this morning and this afternoon.
I just wanted to also add to that, because I feel your comment, because I know it's difficult to see sort of like the reality of these practices taking place, like regulatory reliance. But I feel like a quote that I keep holding on to and using is, don't be afraid of going slowly, be afraid of standing still. Because I think a lot of times these new types of practices are scary for people. And it can be difficult to fit them into their law or their regulation. And so time is needed for change. But I think one thing that has been critically impactful through this time has been the engagement from regulators like the US FDA, like Anvisa, like other regulators that are on the call. Because showing them that it's possible from a regulatory perspective is kind of the trust that they want to see. And so industry is always here and stands by to support, to present, to provide best practices that we see around the world, to provide information about reliance pilots that we see happening, to supply information about what countries have expressed interest. And so if we increase those pilots and we increase those examples of successes, we can actually get to the point where some of these COVID lessons learned become normal practice, because it shouldn't necessarily be practices that are implemented to help us through the next pandemic. They are sensible, wise practices that should be the norm. Thank you.
And maybe just adding to my previous comment, I also think it's helpful. One of my favorite sayings is, if you aim at nothing, you will hit it. So convergence means the goal is 0 country unique technical regulations and standards and conformity assessment measures for medical devices. Now, we may say that's in the limit, we'll only get there at infinity, but at least that's the goal. So, and if we don't have that as a goal, we're not going to get there. So, we've been very appreciative of the different schemes that the different NRAs have, that using the CDRH standards conformity assessment program as one example, where there's the default to, there's through the establishment of that project, there's basically a goal of FDA creating 0 technical regulations and standards that are not based upon international standards. Doesn't always, there still is a need sometimes to have something country unique, but you've got to go through all the GRP justification of using public health resources to do that. So if we could get to that level across the region, across the globe, I think that'll be a huge step in the direction we want to move.
Thank you. And probably complementing, I think we are really, as we were including in the title yesterday, or in the objectives of the panel yesterday, we really need to think that there's an urgent need for paradigms to change. And I think the one that has already started is at the regulators level to really switch the focus from pre-market approval to post-market activities, and not reinvent the wheel for pre-market approval and leave alone what's actually happening with the products when they are in the market, when they are being used to treat patients. So that is kind of like one of the paradigms that I think it is switching, but Again, it'll require time, as Tammy was mentioning, but we need to have like active work in order to help everybody running into that direction. And as we were mentioning yesterday and Stephen confirmed today, this is a matter of co-responsibility. I think that if as industry, we continue to help regulators by preparing ourselves to do a better job while we are producing submissions, while we are producing comments for regulations, we facilitate their lives and we make more effective processes. So I think that that is a critical one when we're talking about products themselves. But the other paradigm that we need to switch is we have been traditionally focusing our efforts on tackling problems when we see that they are impacting access of devices in the market. And what we are intending to do within the project is let's switch the focus. Let's move to a preventive mode. Let's have a more active role in the standard development organizations. Let's have a more active role while regulations are being drafted. Let's have a more active and responsible role while producing comments to those draft regulations. Because with that, at the end of the day, what we're going to end up having is a piece of regulation that is going to be aligned, that will allow us to focus our resources that we're currently using to fight against that or to find a temporary solution for that into creating the arena that we really need in order to provide a better care to the patients in the globe. So, but this is something that requires strategic decisions, not only at the regulators level. It requires strategic decisions at the company levels. And this is a discussion that we have very often with the companies. I mean, it's like, well, we do not have resources to have people attending the technical committees of the standard development organizations. And it's like, then how can we complain? I mean, we don't have a face to go and complain if we have not done our job. And sorry, I'm very honest, open, transparent, and many times too candid. But I think it is a reality. So we have to be accountable of the part of the process that it's in our hands. And it happens not only at a global level, thinking of the international, on the standard development organizations, it is even much worse at a local level. And if you go and talk to the organizations and say, sorry, no, I don't have resources. But the most critical thing is that, and we're learning it more and more, and we know that this is kind of like new language and new ways of doing things for all of us that were not in the world of good regulatory practices until very recently. And we have not acknowledged that. I mean, they have been around for more than 20 years, and it's been only like probably a couple of years that we have actively been starting to talk about them. In that regard is, if we do not take seriously our responsibility by providing proper science-based comments when a piece of regulation is being issued, or if we do not have an active role in the development of standards or at the national standard bodies level, if the piece of regulation is published deviating for international standards, it is going to become more and more difficult for the Technical Barriers to Trade Committee to take into consideration whatever specific trade concern we may bring to their attention, because they start by asking, did you have an active role? Did you comment? Did you share science-based feedback to the regulators? And if our answer is no, there's no way they can go and fight in our favor. So really, we need to switch the focus. Of course, there are things that are critical to be solved today, but we really need to change our focus on how do we prevent all this to happen from the very beginning, where everything should be done correctly, basic quality management philosophy. Do things correct the first time, from the very first time, not try to fix it at the end of the road. So, Mabel, we have a comment.
Yeah, Mabel has her hand raised. She has
Yes,
a
Mabel,
comment.
can you open your microphone, please? I'm sorry, before you respond, I'm so sorry. Before you respond, do everybody has access to the Zoom link and the simultaneous interpretation? That needs, okay, perfect. Gracias, Mabel.
Gracias, Sandra Ligia. Sí, solamente quería a propósito
Thank you,
de lo
Sandra. I just wanted to mention, based on what we are talking,
I wanted to tell you that in Colombia, it's been difficult to be able to accept reliance as the right path to follow. Many times, as they were saying in the presentation, you want to tie everything to your own standard, which is individual and very specific. And you are omitting the fact that the wheel has already been invented, actually. And now, with the allocation of resources topic, both in the private and in the public industry at the government level, I mean, we're always strained with installed capacity issues. So we've made this exercise and we've called to everybody's conscience, and we accept now this reliance topic as the option to follow. First, to actually consider our institutional capabilities and to generate regulatory models that will not impose a load, an additional load to the regulatory entity. You know, in this case, we've been executing the laws based on our Ministry of Health, because many of these regulations, many of these models that usually could be done could create a load for those who applied them. So you were here coming with a topic of human resources and the technology platform and the capabilities and all of that. And in reality, what, as I was saying before, that ended up being an additional load in the pre-market area. You know, when we have this sanitary surveillance area, both the sanitary area and the regulatory entity are not analyzing the post-market aspect, and they do everything in the pre-market. So these are models that are not optimizing as such the different regulations or the competencies of the regulatory entities. They end up being a load. So now we are considering reliance as the best option. Right now, we are working on it. I think that in this afternoon's session, we're going to talk a little bit more about what the ministry and what we've done with them, how we've worked with the MDRC project. And so our colleague from COFEPRIS also mentioned that, you know, we're also working in the Pacific Alliance in favor of that to try to get to those levels of trust for the assessment of low-risk medical devices. So I just wanted to mention our beliefs to this point.
Thank you very much, Mabel. Any comment, Tammy?
Augusto. Oh, no, Augusto, you go first.
No, actually, I just want to complement a few thoughts that we have here. So regarding the movement from the pre-market regulation to the post-market surveillance, and within Anvisa, when we started to simplify some of our procedures, we always say that okay, we have to make the post-market surveillance stronger. But this is another big challenge, because especially in our agency, the post-market office for medical devices is quite small as well. But during our discussions, we identified that the capacity to do this in a simplified way as well. But when we started to make this movement, we also identified that we do not have enough substrate on post-market surveillance, because even hospitals, users, doctors, they do not make the enough notifications for us. So there's both limitations, right? and then so this is something that is very important for the agencies to stimulate the doctors, the users, the population, to notify problems and adverse events and so on to the agencies. And so another point that was mentioned during this discussion, I loved your phrase about being standing still. And This is something that is absolutely true. In our country, the national industry is sometimes gets afraid of the reliance process. Okay, they ask what's going to happen, right? So Anvisa will start to make more difficult requirements to get attended. And then, so we see some resistance for reliance internally. So, but this is something that we have to convince them that this could be something positive even for them, especially in terms of time to get to the market. And also the possibility to get other markets to export products from Brazil to another markets, right? And well, and finally, I just want to highlight your position of the participation of the industry on the when we have public consultations of a new regulation. Please go there, read, criticize, put some information on what may happen if we do this or that. So this is very, very important for the regulator itself. Thank you.
I think I wanted to comment on a couple different things. First, I totally agree with getting industry more involved in commenting. I mean, it is our opportunity to provide a voice. It is our opportunity to provide best practice. And so I also encourage other industry members to get involved in the commenting process if you're not already. What I would add to that is that where law permits, I would also encourage regulators to reach out to learn best practice before writing the draft. So whether that's reaching out to industry members or reaching out to other regulators before that draft is made, a lot can be learned by best practice and looking at the IMDRF documents to ensure the first draft is created in a convergent way. And that can be also a possibility for industry to help provide information so that when that guidance document comes out for public comment, we're closer to convergence. Right. So in the spirit of working together and efficiently using our resources, the closer we get to convergence with that first draft, the easier it is for us to reach convergence in the big picture. I think the other thing I wanted to comment on is reliance is an asset to be used not only for low risk products. And I think that's really important for us to embrace and recognize that trusted regulators around the world have an incredibly robust and comprehensive review of middle to high risk products as well. And so when we look at implementing regulatory reliance, we would encourage looking at implementing that for all products. And so I think some regulators are looking at that as well, but I just wanted to make that point. I know the WHO has implemented procedures around regulatory reliance, and that's also something that we encourage for them, not only to practice reliance on lower risk products, decisions made for lower risk products, but for all products. Thank you.
I just wanted to piggyback on the comment that Tammy has, Fatemeh Razjan from Medtronic. When it comes to commenting, I'd like to encourage regulators outside FDA and other regions to, if possible, to have a longer commenting period when it comes to draft regulations, guidances. And the reason I say that is because there is that sort of language barrier, and it does take time for us to translate from one language to another and then be able to communicate to our regional folks in the company. And sometimes really 30 days is not enough time. So just want to encourage you as you develop regulations and guidances to take that into consideration. Thank you.
Noted.
And thank you very much for making it evident, because at the end of the day, it is part of the challenges that we have when we talk about good regulatory practices. As per the TBT committee and the agreement itself, forget about the committee, the agreement itself, we should have kind of like at least 60 days for commenting. And that it ends up being also very short when we have very, very strong pieces of regulation. I mean, if we really want to do a good job, we really need to spend sufficient time on doing that. But at least having 60 days would be fantastic. And that is something that we have already provided feedback on to the World Health Organization, because even themselves may provide like a couple of weeks commenting time. It's like, I mean, there's no way. I mean, by the time you find within their website that there's a piece of information that is supposed to be commented on, I mean, the time is already passed. So this is something that, again, we need to keep putting on the table in the discussions. And what we have done as coalition, when we have submitted comments to the World Health Organization, we start our comments by saying there was not sufficient time. We need to have sufficient time to comment if we really want to have valuable information. I mean, it's not the sake of commenting for comment. I mean, it's not commenting for the sake of commenting. It is really commenting for the sake of improving the quality of whatever document is going to be released. So, I mean, we keep pushing on that, and we keep pushing every single piece, every position paper that we are developing. We are emphasizing good regulatory practices within them. Of course, commenting period, of course, whatever is differing from international standards, whatever is not sufficiently strong in regards of regulatory impact assessment. And thinking of regulatory impact assessment, that has nothing to do with what is it going to cost to the industry to implement. It is really challenging whether the regulatory agency do have sufficient resources as either to modify what they are doing, if it is only an update, quote unquote, only an update in regulation, or if they are adding responsibilities to the current ones. Do they really have the resources to do that? And that is part of the analysis that we need to do when those publications are coming out. And those analyses are not done like in 2 days. If you really want to do a good quality job on that. And what's the point if we're going to be doing that, if we're not going to be doing it like in a strong way? It's going to be only a waste of everybody's time, as it is happening up to now in several cases. And sorry, but that is the reality. So is there any other question? Because we have both Mabel and Oscar that would like to share additional information as from what was shared yesterday in the videos. So if it is okay with everybody, we can probably turn back to them for sharing these ones, and then we can continue with Q&A. Perfect. So Mabel, would you like to get us started with this?
Ok, me han pedido que no comparta.
Okay, I've been asked to share some slides I had. So you will hear me for the next few minutes. All right, there we go. Yep, yesterday you could see
Sorry,
a
Mabel, we're
video
not seeing
that-
your screen.
We can't see your screen.
Hola.
Te escuchamos, pero no vimos tu.
Ok, es que sí tengo una presentación para compartir.
I do have a presentation to share, but I was asked not to use it.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Am I right? Or
Yeah, that's fine, that's fine. So let's get going then. I'm sorry.
Listo, perfecto. Muchas gracias. Bueno, les decía que
well, I was saying that yesterday, Dr. Lucia Ayala, who's the director for medical devices of INVIMA, started talking about the role of INVIMA as a health department of Colombia. We will be elaborating on this point of what I said in a general context, the challenges we faced as a health agency and some of the key learnings we took from there. In retaking yesterday's message, I would like to mention in the first instance that in Colombia, within the health sector, there is a ministry which is like the biggest, like the umbrella covering other departments, including INVIMA. So the ministry is in charge of putting together the rules, and INVIMA, as one of its arms, is to implement and enforce those laws, and particularly in sanitary supervision. And we, as a health supervision, we make the administrative decisions, we authorize marketing of products, we certify plants and importers, and we are also in charge of all the post-market surveillance. So if we think about health and sanitary supervision, and if you take into consideration life cycle of a medical device, it goes from innovation and development, going through manufacturing, imports, then followed by marketing authorization, which includes providing a registration number, and then it closes with post-market surveillance, which is focused on identifying the likely events or incidents connected with failure, either in design or manufacturing, or in the use of a medical device or a diagnostic reactive. So what did we do before COVID? We would do all four of this: pre-market surveillance and post-market surveillance. However, COVID hit Colombia. I if I remember well, the first case was reported in March, and then we started seeing all of the challenges we have all been faced with, and starting to wonder, what are we going to do? We had never been in the face of this kind of a pandemic in Colombia, so we decided it was the moment we had to respond to the people. And of course, we had to guarantee public health in Colombia. So that was the first challenge. The first challenge was face masks to begin with. There were so many concerns. Of course, we could identify how much people didn't know about this face masks. There were all kinds of face masks: surgical, civilian, made of fabric, all the way to high efficiency and industrial face masks. So what was the first challenge? To know the medical device as such, to understand the manufacturing process, its uses, and finally declaring it as a medical vital device with certain characteristics so that it could come into our country's market and accepted into it with minimum requirements in order to make availability of this product much more agile and make sure that we're enough for the people in Colombia. But then a second challenge came, as Dr. Lucia said in her video, and it is that at the beginning of the pandemic, 90% of the things we had available for COVID attention were medical devices. They were not necessarily drugs, it was devices basically. So there was a need to establish a short list of vital critical medical devices which had to be available in the market for this emergency. And it is there that we had a first approach and contact in the pandemic with reliance of asking other health organizations, how are you doing it? How are you handling this? And also we had some approaches with the FDA, also with the MAV, and some other with Anvisa. And it was a good input for us, a valuable one, so that INVIMA, within INVIMA, a group of professionals called the Review Commission. This is an outside body to INVIMA, well, where members of the academia, the health department sit, and there are some other association. including, of course, professionals from the Directorate General of Devices. So we sat and reviewed those devices. From the beginning, we identify 174 medical devices, which were divided into 16 categories, and it established the listing that would be made available for the pandemic, and those would enter the country as imported or possibly manufactured in the country with the minimum of requirements. So this was the second challenge we identified as days started going by in the pandemic, and seeing how numbers were increasing in Colombia. So back in those days, the Ministry of Health was working thoroughly to issue the decrees and to work on the standards to cover all those developments and planned from the national government, and of course also to have us covered in terms of market authorizations. From the first images I mentioned to you of pre and post market surveillance, new standards were issued to minimize the requirements to import and market these devices. So these flexible requirements issued by the Ministry of Health was keeping the stage of reviewing research protocols. It was shortening the number of requirements from the stages of manufacturing and imports to the point of health registration, and it was reinforcing those sections that we need to have in post-market surveillance. But if we go to the biggest challenge we had in planning and in innovation and development, it was mechanical respirators. Some academic institutions, in collaboration with private companies, some other mixed companies, some other government-owned, one day they decided to make respirators. But it was a big challenge because they started from not knowing the kind of regulations in place for medical devices or what kind of features they had to cover, particularly from the point of innovation, research and development. So INVIMA was accompanying these official initiatives. We accompanied 25 initiatives maybe of just for mechanical respirators development. And only 3 of those 24 initiatives reach stage 3, which is phase 1 clinical test. That is to say, they came to be tested in humans, but in a controlled environment. But today, this is the status quo. There was no massive manufacturing of mechanical respirators for use in Colombia. They never went into phase 4, which is a clinical study number 2 with a bigger population. And of course, these respirators did not succeed in proving safety, quality, and efficiency to replace those which had many years of research and development, like some of the imported products. However, you may think that importing was a good choice, but then another challenge came here. The pandemic resulted in many establishments to change their social responsibilities in the pandemic. And so, for example, car dealers wanted to become importers of mechanical respirators, or companies, uh, I don't know, producing alcoholic beverages. They wanted to manufacture mechanical respirators. So this, they didn't know actually about the biomedical equipment. And of course, those companies would buy from outside, they would do business, and as they came as minimum requirements, and they had a problem with that because again there was no knowledge of a capacity, the storage capacity certificate and the proper requirements to store them. And so again, we were seeing products in the market with a questionable quality, to the point that in this period between 2020 2021, we had many reports of failures related to mechanical respirators. Just to give an idea, between 2020 2021, we had between some 30 some reports of incidents connected with medical devices. And out of this, 44,664 were for mechanical respirators, and 69 out of 664 were connected with this type of respirators, which entered the market with minimum requirements. And one of them produced a sanitary alert in Colombia, which resulted in death and injury. So if we go further into manufacturing, this standards issued by the Ministry of Health was not just on the conventional side, but on the regulatory side for storage, manufacturing, and specific requirements for issuing of a permit. It was a reduction to a minimum. It was just like saying, we will be manufacturing this product using this standard, and this will be the areas of interest. We had some issues with manufacturing in 2019. There were 16 companies producing, 16 certified companies producing face masks, but this number skyrocketed to thousands, and 1,934 were some of those companies that changed their main activity. That is to say, companies that had no experience whatsoever. It was 1,934. This was a huge surge in the number of companies producing that. And there was a minimum requirement, there were minimum requirements for importing just with a technical file and free sale certificate. And from there, you had trust, because in some cases, we didn't see the CBL. It was an emergency use certificate, which other agencies were issuing. And here, obviously, post-market regulating the efforts, traceability, information report, and post-market and surveillance, strengthening and checking where products were, who were manufacturing them, and the amounts. And here, this went together with challenges, and those challenges resulted in key learnings. First and most important is reliance. We had to learn to trust. We had to learn to see it from a first hand. One, what have other agencies done that might be of use to us, so that we as a health agency to become aligned with the rest of the world. And the authorization of use with a free sale certificate, or maybe conducting them virtually. So here we have an issue of reliance. With the agencies that are homologated, what kind of learning we got, and what kind of things we don't want to see again. The declaration of in another pandemic, because we realize that means like opening the door to many devices with not reliable quality, and we should also not allow regulations with exceptions in terms of sanitary requirements like we did in this pandemic. And of course, one thing we should definitely do, and this is a big piece of learning, is working as a country and a department to work on a specific regulation for use in an emergency. So that was the biggest piece of learning for us. We need to do it. And as a result of this, we're now working on a draft standard. And as a government, we have been doing this with you and the MDRC. And Oscar, I'm sure, will talk about this from the perspective of the Department of Health. So taking care of all these challenges and the learning is basically to have a regulation for emergency use authorization that will enable us to be better equipped for another pandemic, and doing it in the right way according to a regulation which we didn't have in the past. And I think this is, broadly speaking, what I wanted to mention to you. And I hope this information was clear.
Thank you very much, Mabel. And before we go to listen from Oscar, we have a question in here from Tammy, if you would like to pose it.
Hello, and thank you so much for your presentation. A lot of really good information in there in progress, so congratulations to you. I also wanted to ask you a question about the standards that the Ministry of Health was working on for example, respirators or other essential diagnostics that were needed. Did they start with internationally recognized standards that already existed, or perhaps reach out to other regulators that had already published those standards, or did they start from scratch?
En el tema de la fabricación nacional.
For domestic manufacturing, the group of evaluators, which were looking not only at design and manufacturing of respirators, they were demanding well-established international standards. So they did not start from scratch writing a national standard, because we don't even have one for mechanical respirators. So what they did was, these are international references. These are the ones to be used for the manufacturing of mechanical respirators, and run this test of electrocompatibility. I don't want to go deep because I'm not an electronics specialist, but they were asked to guarantee the quality, safety, and efficiency of those devices, so that they wouldn't cause any damage on population, and of course fulfilling with the 4 stages demanded for a clinical device, for a medical devices. So it was run the test in a lab, then use it in animals. I think they tested them on some pigs, then it moved to a sample with humans. I understand it was 5 or 6 humans with informed consent. And that's as far as they got. And in answering your question, yes, we applied international standards.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mabel. So we're gonna get started now with Oscar. Oscar, we could be very appreciative if we can have your remarks kind of like probably somewhere like in 5 minutes or so. So we may have additional time for an open discussion and conversation. So thank you very much, Oscar.
Listo.
All right.
Básicamente, como les había
Basically, as I said on the video, these actions were focusing on centralized procurement. Colombia has 50 million inhabitants. So this involves heterogeneous population. We have Afro descendants, indigenous people, and we also have 3 different healthcare systems. One is under contribution of workers. Workers pay a contribution to their health, and employers pay and they directly deduct it from people's check. And they don't make any direct contribution. It is directly taken from their fortnightly payment. There are some other healthcare regimes like the military. Then you have teachers and workers of the public sector. That's another healthcare regime. And the workers, the Social Security has, besides healthcare, it has also some social services attached to it. And the current government is evaluating and making some proposals to amend this. But this is basically how it works. All workers have healthcare services provided, and this is why we had this centralized procurement of respirators, because each of these healthcare providers used to make their procurement separately, and that is why we decided to have a centralized procurement, and therefore we need to evaluate for different characteristics. And after the emergency, we are now looking at a better way. It was not the most successful, although we did it through the emergency. We bought mechanical respirators to enable more hospitals and beds. But as a ministry, we believe this is something we need to keep working on. Now, in terms of making better regulatory conditions for COVID attention, there are several approaches. One, including a regulatory framework from taking the technical requirements which were enforced in the country and then making them flexible. Flexibilizing is one thing I like because it means you are in the framework, but it becomes less onerous. And there are some special considerations in the emergency for emergency authorization use, which is the point we want to review at. And I can explain this further later. So within COVID, we decided to have 2 processes. One in which you have CDL, you can enter. Mabel has already explained some of these potential things which did not work well, or as a part of the regulatory proposal, which we would wish to review. And the second decree, which are specific requirements and the framework of the emergency, which imply less activities in the process of authorization. This is, this was added to the declaration of availability. As they said, they were based on availability in the market and the actions being taken by other regulatory authorities in the region. So what we did was to guarantee or to find a way so that those elements here to meet, and they were subject to technical requirements. So when we decided to define this, what the elements were and what the differentiation was with from a surgical mask or a protective mask or civil mask. And for example, for people not exposed to aerosols, etc. So we started to look at this and we identified a test with some acceptance criteria on filtration, splashing, and that was an important thing. We saw that there's work done on this quality criteria for this test, and as a ministry and the regulator, and see these were the criteria to be applied. So the person going for medical health, they don't know what the criteria are, and then we have to say if those criteria are the ones that should be accepted for a population.
So in that framework of the sanitary emergency, we had a huge peak of import requests that we had to work on, and that made the actions of the group a little bit harder. What is it that we have here in the ministry? We are ensuring that we are optimizing all those attentions, all so that the end user can have everything possible to be able to have the full authorization. So this is what we have. Now, we have these two activities, and this is based on some proposals that we're working on for emergency management, for actions and devices that are in the research phase and that are required to care for an emergency, as well as those medical devices that where we don't have enough offer in the market and that we can use. So that is a process, and we have designed a proposal that has been managed in several areas, and in one of those, we have the fact of generating that availability of medical devices that have been found in the market and that could cover that need during the emergency. So I believe that in the days to come, we're going to be talking a lot about what we are expecting from the regulatory framework that we started to develop. But I just wanted to leave you a last message. This last message about the participation of the different stakeholders. These spaces that we have a clear mission for the country, and this has been defined in the bylaws, but we also acknowledge that the implications of this are not only for sanitary registries or for the health ministries, the representation of the ministries in different areas, but this would also affect the patients and all of those who work here. And that is making us to have the availability of the medical devices with the necessary quality, and that has the lowest impact on the population. So in general, that is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oscar. So I think we're ready to start again the open discussion and comments and questions. There is a question over there. Douglas, please.
Well, first, thank you, Oscar, for bringing this information that is very relevant to understand how the things are evolving and working on Colombia. During your points, you were referring several times on how close is the connection between the regulatory requirement and frameworks with the procurement, in this case, the centralized procurements. But these connections go beyond. It's also related to improve access, to have a better or a good patient's health outcomes, and also talking about financial sustainability. So my question is, when you make these decisions in the centralized procurement process, which regulatory requirements in terms of safety, performance do you take in account? How you ensure that the work in connection with the healthcare health technology assessment agency is considered to avoid duplication, to have a process robust enough in terms of ensuring quality products on the market for patients, but also at the same times remove rework on processes based on the different scenarios that you mentioned.
Hay dos cosas, ¿qué se hizo y qué es lo que debiera de haberse hecho?
We have two things, what has been done and what will be done. And the what has been done, the national government established a decree which was the creation of a emergency mitigation fund known as FOME. And he gave a specific entity the management of the money, which was afterwards the National Unit for Emergency Care. And what they did was to create a contractual process, and that contracting process would specify the things that were required. And there, us as a ministry, we're defining those characteristics to have each of the elements that were required. So in that contract, in that contracting process, we set forth the environment or the scope that was required. So we included there, we need to have X amount of people, we need to have the process published in the website so that all of those that are enrolled as suppliers with the national government can work on whatever is necessary. And that is creating a series of conditions that made everything not a little bit complicated, not so fast. Then taken into consideration of what should have happened is that we should have had a contracting process that's much more quick and swift, because it was hard to get any substitutions, for example, and so based on the control entities, we don't have the people to work on these. There are only 3 people in the country that could offer the necessary information. So we had this type of information, what was happening, but the creation or the structuring of the conditions when we have the list for the contracting is considering the technical characteristics that we had defined from international regulations, based on international regulations, to define what is the minimum that we should have for a mechanical ventilator, or what was necessary for a process or for I want to remember exactly what was done, In Colombia, we have an institute for technological assessment that created expert consensus to care for COVID. And based on that information, they structured what the physicians should have to care for COVID in the patients, including sprays or the mechanical ventilators. They also did that. So that was done with an expert consensus group. And that was done in terms of gathering all the evidence that is available. That wasn't a lot at that moment. I remember this was done in May of 2020. So we did consider from the position of COVID, we did a full analysis to see with the evidence that we had available at the international level to see what was the best thing for everybody. So that was brought to the ministry. We extracted the characteristics of those medical devices based on that information, and that was transferred to the contracting requests for the purchases that was presented.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Marisol Sanchez. Marisol. Marisol, we cannot listen to you. So probably while we get whatever technical problem we're having fixed, we may have also a comment from Tammy, please.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I have a couple of comments. I have heard a number of times over the last few days, actually, the necessity to have the emergency use pathway, which has really changed, the game as far as getting these products accelerated to patients. I think still from a manufacturer's perspective, there exists an opportunity to develop a universal emergency use pathway, because as we are producing products and putting information together to meet regulators' requirements, even for emergency use pathway, there's great variability. So we're instead of focusing on one unified target that reaches the patients fastest, we're pointing at, many targets, recreating the same information, sometimes over and over again in a way that is specific to the jurisdiction. So if there is any way for regulators to continue to partner or other global entities to lead on that conversation, I think that would also help us accelerate. And then the last thing I wanted to comment on was in regard to post-market, because I know that there is a move to strengthen post-market. And I want to highlight that IMDRF has done a significant amount of work with regard to post-market. And part of the way that we can strengthen post-market is by adopting those practices. They have codes. They have definitions. What is an adverse event? They recommend timing for reporting those events. And I think convergence in any way possible to that criteria will help us protect global health, because we are looking at the same data, we are comparing the same data, and it allows us to move more proactively to protect patients. So as countries move to strengthen post-market, I encourage that they read those documents closely. Thank you.
Excuse me, Sandra, there's a hand raised. Douglas has a comment or a question.
Okay. Is it okay to go ahead? I just wanted to kind of echo some of your statements. One, yes, from a post-market perspective, it's a really good point. We at FDA have integrated many of those IMDRF codes into our MDR reporting system. And it becomes even more important as we're looking at the future work of this group. And right now we're looking at, okay, the codes have all been harmonized. How do we now look and track and trending signals and common data? And so it's going to even become more important to try to harmonize and utilize that, because you're right, from a global perspective, being able to address these post-market safety issues, if we're all operating from the same terminology, it's much easier to do that. With respect to the emergency use authorization, it is a topic that came up within IMDRF and the management committee meeting in Sydney. There's been a lot of push to try to do that. One of the challenges that we have as regulators is not everybody's operating under an emergency use authorization scheme. And so regulators at the IMDRF table had a challenge to say, how can we develop EUA commonalities and processes if there were jurisdictions at the table that don't have an EUA pathway? They don't have that within the regulatory framework. But one thing I think we can do, okay, is also encourage reliance in this aspect as well. Sorry, super. Is it okay? It's a little better. Nope.
Yeah, turn your audio off on your Zoom. Turn your mic off. Oh, well.
No problem. But what I was going to say is maybe it's not so much, working from a commonality of EUA because of the challenges that are there, but also not only talking about reliance from a typical pathway, but reliance also in the EUA space. That we try to encourage it, if their regulators already have a scheme set up, try to encourage reliance for those that may not have it on those that do have an EUA. Because I think even getting pushed to try to develop that common terminology is going to be a challenge amongst all of us.
Sandra, can you see the questions that are being typed? Because it's in Spanish, so I don't know what's being said.
I'm so sorry. So we have a question from Clarina Solangeli. So that's for all the panelists. So she's asking what the tool would be or what the way would be to make surveillance on reliance, or is it just a matter that because of applying reliance, there is not such a control required over the way it is implemented?
So the question would be how to promote surveillance over the products approved under reliance.
Actually, my understanding of the question, and Clarina, please correct me if I am wrong, but it is like, is there a way kind of like to supervise, to check how reliance is actually applied and how it ended up impacting the products in the market or the outputs of the products in the market?
I believe that every approval that we may have under a reliance scheme, we would have some kind of identification in our records of the products that were released to the market, considering a reliance or approval from another jurisdiction. Then, at least from in Anvisa, we would have the possibility to review the authorization of this product if we identify any situation during the post-market surveillance, and we may ask for the manufacturer extra information, or even eventually we can talk to the agency that has approved previously this product. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but I believe this is the best approach that, and this is the practice that we have in other jurisdictions that are using already the reliance.
Okay, thank you. Oscar, I see your hand is raised.
Sí, yo creo que con el tema de Reliance y de
I
la
think that when we talk about reliance and reliability, I mean, at least here in the ministry, what we've understood is that we want to focus it on the following point, that medical devices, and especially in a market like that of Colombia, where 90% of the things, almost 90% of the things are imported, the idea is that we can go ahead and do things faster to have the medical devices in the market, but that doesn't mean that we cannot do a surveillance on the quality of the device, on the list of adverse events, and continue analyzing them and to communicate directly with that agency that issued the original authorization, so that we can follow through certain procedures to keep and ensure that that medical device is having a good performance. I think that's the objective, to have like an additional process of IEC or IDC specifically for those medical devices that came in through reliance, and so that the authorizations that are given in this framework would have that surveillance component, additional component. That way, we need to remember always, because things are going to change the needs, the IEC needs for those medical devices. But we do consider that it is important to, or for the medical device to be in the market. And if that's the case, to see how it can be used and just keep that surveillance. There are some things that at that moment, and I know that this is not part of the panel right now, but I think that the availability or this shortage of medical devices worldwide ensures that first, we need to make sure that the products are available for our patients, and then we should start analyzing and see if that reliance is right there, you know? First to see if it's available, and then we start seeing if that reliance aspect, if it has created any type of adverse events, or maybe that it's not complying with what originally was set forth, you know, or it needs to be removed from the market, all of that, recalled. So all of that is being considered afterwards.
Thank you. So I think we're getting close to wrapping up. So probably what we can do is like a last round of comments from our regulators here in the room. If there are kind of like remarks that you would like to share, what would be your probably in this case your recommendations for the private sector as to support all these efforts in reliance, how we can better support the regulators in this path, and how we can help like expedite the processes for all of us, and especially the patients to be benefited out of the potential of convergence and reliance and recognition. So probably we can get started with you, Melissa.
Sure. I think we had some good discussion earlier this morning. And, I think it is important that just to reiterate, when things are out for comment, trying to help solidify our positions, not only on proposed regulations or legislation, but also things like WHO's work. We try to fight the good fight, but sometimes it's one voice being heard in the room. And so having that other perspective really does help to kind of say, it's not just us, we have concerns, but there are also concerns from an industry perspective as well. Because far too often it's, well, you're just, trying to tell us how to do things, US FDA. So having one solidified voice also helps. So I encourage industry to look at these documents, not only IAM draft regulations, but looking at the IAM draft documents, providing us feedback, providing us comments, looking at these documents from WHO. We know many of these developing regulators are influenced by WHO, and we do have some concerns with some of the projects and how documents have evolved lately. And I think having that help and support to be able to push as more international harmonized positions would be helpful from at least our perspective.
Yeah, I think that we have similar thoughts on this, and the main point would be to stimulate industry in general to be involved in this process, to give their positions to the agencies, and maybe inform the agencies which are their experiences in different jurisdictions that we may not know, we may not be aware of other schemes of reliance that may be used. So normally we have some references with agencies that are near to us, so under IMDRF, but maybe there is some other schemes in other jurisdictions that could be used, and that could inspire us to have a easier approach or a easier way to make the reliance feasible. Then, and the other point would be to consider internally in each agency to promote reliance for the national industry in each of those countries that could be interested on this. I think this is a good challenge, at least for Brazil. This is something that we understand there is some resistance from the national industry for the reliance, but we can identify some way to tell them that it could be a good something good even for the national industry as well, right?
Thank you. Daniel?
Just one more comment. Another thing where I think industry can help is making us aware. Augusto it made me think as you were speaking about, we know what's going on with a lot of our close partners in IMDRF because we're always having conversations, right? We're always kind of sharing our practices and policies, but we're not always aware necessarily of what's happening in other regions. And so, if there's a concerning area you're seeing, some type of regulation that's being issued, some types of actions that are being done that are sort of against what we have best practices, let us know too. I mean, there are ways that we can try to help through education, through other means as well. But I think that's another area where, we're not always aware of everything that's out there. We fortunately have regional offices in some regions where we then, have a little bit more heightened awareness, but in other areas, we just quite frankly don't. And so that would also be very helpful for us to know that. Yeah.
I'll just want to make a invitation, rather a comment, and to our partner governments. So whenever you have the possibility of working with my agency or other agencies to take full advantage of what's being offered, way too often we see partner governments or in agencies in partner governments wanting to work with us and requesting technical assistance. But when it's offered, it takes time to get to a point where you can actually define what you want. And then there's kind of a lukewarm approach in how to accept it, incorporate it into your processes and so on. Unfortunately, technical assistance, especially the technical assistance that my agency provides has an end, and we cannot be there for you as a partner forever. And as our administrators have said, we are in the business of putting ourselves out of business. We want you to be self-reliant, and we want you to create capacity and eventually cease us to exist because you already have the tools for becoming successful. So whenever you have the opportunity of working with us, please try to work with us as fast as you can and take full advantage of what is being offered. We always try to provide you with the best possible tools that are out there. And we sometimes work with the private sector to do that. We sometimes work with the academia to do that. Sometimes we work with other partner agencies. And sometimes we bring all of them together. So just an invitation to work with us and to work with us efficiently and expeditiously. Is that a word? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're wrapping up. I think there's a really, really quick comment from Tammy. Really quick, please.
I'm sorry. I know I talk a lot. I just wanted to go back to what you were saying, Augusto, about talking with ministries of health or even ministries of finance when it comes to regulatory reliance, because we have seen through published studies that increased access leads to improved health outcomes, and improved health outcomes can mitigate the severity or the length of treatment that's needed. And when you talk about supporting, healthcare spend, that is a really important message, I think, for them. There are some investments that we make earlier on to improve that. And we actually were able to see that with COVID. So if you want more information on that, or, if we can help in any way, we're here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tammy. So just before closing, really thank you very much for the engagement, for the really fruitful discussion that we had today. There's way more to come, so look forward to see you. It is going to be a different room in the afternoon. So the next activity that we have planned, I mean, that is within the MedTech program is this fireside chat with Dr. Robert Califf, Commissioner of the US FDA. That is going to happen from 12:15 to 1:30. It is exactly the same place as we had lunch yesterday. And then at 2:30 Eastern, we're going to be regrouping for the MDRC specifics, discussions and conversation. And that is going to happen at room 257 AB, which is right beside us. We are at 258. We're going to be at 257 in the afternoon, starting 2:30 Eastern. So thank you very much also for the audience, the virtual audience, and look forward to continue fruitful conversations in the afternoon. Thank you.